to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. Even during estrangement, and even when your adult child is already unhappy with you, it's still necessary for you as a parent to hold strong, healthy boundaries in your relationship. If your adult child uses foul language when he talks to you, especially in a denigrating way that involves swearing directly at you or calling you names, that should be flagged as a boundary violation for you. And if it is a boundary violation, then it shouldn't go unchallenged. Sometimes parents think that they have to put up with foul language if they want their child to talk to them at all. But I don't agree. It is never okay for your child, your spouse, your siblings, your parents, or your friends to speak to you in an outright disrespectful manner. And no one should speak to your child that way either. If you or someone else in the family has used foul language when talking to your child or in the presence of your child, then your child can't be blamed for using that same type of language herself. But of course, two wrongs don't make a right, so in my mind, foul language is something that should be nipped, if not in the bud, then as soon as you realize it's a problem. If there's already an established pattern in which family members attack each other with foul language, well, at the risk of understating the case, this is a communication problem. But don't believe for a second that it's too late to address it just because your child is now an adult. Responding to foul language in an adult child is something you can still do, and I think it has two separate parts. The first part only applies if your child learned to use that language at home. And the second part applies in every case. First, if your child learned to use that sort of language by example in the home and has been using it with you possibly since before he left home, the first part of your response should be to acknowledge that fact. Take accountability, even if it was someone else in the family who taught him to speak that way. The point of accountability is to assure your child that you know it's not his fault that he speaks to you that way. For example, you might say, "I know that your father used language like that when speaking to me." Or, "I know I've set a poor example with my own use of foul language." Or, "I know that we tended to speak rudely to each other in our family," or whatever the case is. And then you can say something like, "I'm sorry I let you believe that was ever okay, because it's not." That's the first part of your response to foul language in an adult child. Acknowledge where they learned the behavior and take full responsibility for that. This will keep your child from becoming unnecessarily defensive and rejecting the boundary that you're about to put in place. If neither you nor anyone else in the family ever used foul language in the home when your child was growing up, then obviously you will skip that first part. But if it seems like a gray area, if you're not really sure where she gets it, then why not err on the side of taking responsibility? You won't do any harm by being over-accountable in this area. You're not in court. You're not confessing to a crime. It's okay to take responsibility. But if there was very clearly no foul language in your home, then of course that doesn't apply to you, and you can skip directly to the second part. And that is setting a boundary around what is acceptable language for your child to use when speaking with you. I wouldn't get too strict about the tone your child uses when he speaks to you. Sometimes when we're upset or impatient with somebody, it can be hard to stay calm enough never to let negativity seep into our tone of voice. So in my opinion, setting boundaries around vocal tone might be asking too much from adult children, or anyone. It's up to you, but that's my opinion. Especially if foul language is a real problem with your child, then a harm reduction approach will probably be more successful than being really specific about the tone that your child needs to use. Be as specific as you can, though, about what the boundaries are as far as language is concerned. In my family of origin, most language was acceptable, but it would have been unacceptable to curse directly at someone. For example, saying, you. That was something that was never heard in my house growing up. And if my stepdaughter were to say that to me, she would be crossing a line. The other thing that would cross my personal boundary would be name-calling, especially involving rude or ugly words or images. So those are examples of possible boundaries, and not everyone's boundaries need to be in exactly the same place. You might feel perfectly comfortable being called certain names, but you don't want the Lord's name taken in vain around you. You get to determine what is acceptable to you. So that's the homework that you have to do before you can successfully employ the second part of your response, which is to draw that line calmly and clearly. So your response, if it involves both accountability and boundary setting, might sound something like this. I know I've never complained before about foul language, and I'm sorry I let you believe it was acceptable to me, but I'm not willing anymore to put up with your calling me a or saying you, so please don't do that anymore. The last thing you'll need to do in order to set the new boundary will be to let your child know kindly and calmly what will happen if he crosses the line. For example, I asked you to stop using that language. If you continue, I'll end the conversation and we'll have to pick it up another time. Okay, now comes the hardest part, holding your boundary. As soon as we set new boundaries, especially with family members or people who've known us a long time, they will test to see if we mean business. Be prepared to do what you said you'd do if they cross the line, and be prepared to do it repeatedly. Try not to get too frustrated with this process. There's nothing rude or wrong about your child testing a new boundary. That's how boundaries work. Just give a warning in a calm, reasonable voice, and then follow through on the consequences. Here's what that might look like in practice. Let's say your child calls you a name in her text. You respond by texting, "Please don't call me that. If you continue using that language, I'll have to end our conversation." Your child writes back and does it again. You stop texting. That is the end of the conversation for that day. If your child keeps writing and trying to bait you, you hold firm. You said you'd end the conversation, and you did. What's happening is not a catastrophe. It's normal. You don't have to be stern or panicky about holding that boundary. Just do what you said you'd do, and don't overthink it. If you receive an apology, you can restart the conversation. You can be gracious. You can even thank your child for respecting your new boundary. That shows goodwill. If appropriate, you might even let your child know that you're going to hold yourself to the same behavior you're requesting from her. Now, while all this boundary setting is going on, you might be conscious of the fact that your child is trying to tell you something, even if she's not going about it in a very good way. And so, since your aim is ultimately to repair and rebuild the emotional connection between you and your child, you might want to validate a child who's been swearing at you. This is a neat trick, and here's how you might do it. To incorporate validation into an effective response to foul language, you can say something like, I want to hear you. I care about how you feel, but I can't listen when you speak to me this way. Please don't use that language, or I'll have to end the conversation. See, so there's the validation, but also the boundary. They're both present at the same time. Responding to foul language during an estrangement feels like you're walking a tightrope. You don't want to encourage disrespect, but you also don't want to push your child away by being difficult in his eyes. Setting boundaries of any kind, even healthy ones, can feel really risky at the best of times. But if you stay calm and accept any accountability that's called for, your child may complain, but will not hold the boundary against you. Ultimately, she may even come to respect you more for setting a boundary that deep down you probably both know should have been set before. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.